Greetings, class. This is Professor Theo. I hope you all had a blessed, holy weekend with Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and Resurrection Sunday. And now we are back, hopefully, into the swing of things, just with a couple more weeks left of class. So I want to encourage you all to finish strong. Yes, and so today I'm going to record this lecture on intercultural communication related theories. And any one of you who've already taken me in any other class know I love incorporating theories in all my classes. And so I want to be able to just give just 6 theories that are kind of some directly related to culture, some more indirectly related. I think they're all helpful in helping us understand and how to better navigate intercultural relationships. And so you can find this on Canvas in terms of the PowerPoint slides, and it's labeled, I believe, Intercultural Communication Related Theories. All right, let's get into the swing of things. First, we're just going to start off with a simple definition. Now, when you take me in the future for comm theory, or for those who've taken me for comm theory, in most classes I really just give one definition of a particular thing. I think there's multiple definitions. But since this isn't comm theory class, I just want to give you just a working definition of theory, just so we have a working understanding. And so this particular definition says theory is an organized set of concepts, explanations, and principles that depict some aspect of the human experience. So it's not just one principle, it's not just one concept, it's not just one explanation, it's a culmination of a whole bunch of different explanations, a whole bunch of different principles and that come together to help us basically make sense of human experience. So when we experience something in our lives, maybe there's a breakup, maybe there's something in terms of a positive reaction to a relationship, or we see someone's behavior and we want to try to make sense of those things. Anything that takes place in our lives, whenever we want to try to make sense of those particular things, theories help give us some tools to help make sense of those things. They help explain, they help interpret, they help make sense. And so theory is very good when it comes to doing those things. But once again, since it is called theory, it implies that we're not saying that this is the law, that this explanation can be applied to every situation. So it needs to be contextualized. So just because a particular theory explains one particular situation one time, it doesn't mean it's going to explain every similar situation every time. But it does just allows us to make educated guesses and to formulate some explanations that make sense based upon the context. All right. And so with that being said, I'm just going to introduce you to 6 specific theories that can be utilized in terms of helping us navigate, explain, interpret, help make sense when it comes to our intercultural interactions. One is attribution theory. We haven't talked specifically about attribution theory, but we have talked about attributions. And if you recall, attributions are simply ways in which we can explain someone's behavior. And so when someone does something, including ourselves, we often want to know, why did that person do that? Why do I do this? Why do I have a tendency to act this way? And we want to know, what is that behavior attributed to? So what is it caused by? How is it explained? And so in that same vein, attribution theory talks about how individuals interpret events. It relates to how we think about certain behaviors. And it assumes that people try to determine why they do what they do. And this is so true. Think about a negative experience, a breakup, a death in the family. To a certain extent, we get just a little comfort whenever we are able to come up with a logical explanation about why that thing happened. We search for those answers. Even if the answer may not be the full answer, we want to know, why did that happen? Why did this happen to me? And it's because we feel better whenever we can come up with a logical attribution to a particular behavior. Yes, this person broke up with me, but here's the reason why. Yes, this good thing happened, and here's the reason. We want to know what was the reason behind those behaviors, those circumstances, those events. So attribution theory simply says that as individuals, we have a tendency to want to interpret events. We want to have a tendency to want to be able to explain certain things. And attribution theory does help us formulate some of those explanations. Because hopefully whenever we're going to attribute something to someone, we're not just pulling that attribution out of the air. But oftentimes it's based upon experiences, based upon logic, it's based upon history. So if you're in a relationship with someone and they have a tendency to show up late to everything, and you have a meeting at 3 o'clock, here it is 3:30, they're not there, could you panic that something's going wrong? Or did they get in an accident? Are they all right? Yeah, you could. But based upon attribution theory, you would surmise, based upon history, based upon experience, that a more logical attribution, a more logical explanation for their tardiness is this is what they do. This is how they always are. And so attribution theory does give us a handle and a tool to explain the behaviors of others as well as ourselves. And oftentimes those attributions should be based upon history, should be based upon experience, should be based upon logic, evidence. But even then, since it's just a theory, there's a large tendency that sometimes we may still misattribute. Even based upon history and experience, we may still get it wrong in that particular context because people are changing. So maybe that person who's always late is normally late because they just struggle with being late, but maybe this was the one day where they would have been on time, but they got into an accident. You don't know. And so we can attribute based upon logic and experience, but even then, it's not 100% accurate all the time. And this really comes into play when you talk about intercultural relationships, because when you're dealing with individuals who are different from you, if they do behaviors that are similar to yours, you're going to assume that they're doing those same behaviors for the same reasons. Yet they may be doing those similar behaviors but for totally different reasons. Or they may not behave like you at all, and now you want to figure out, why do they act this way? You know, the way I was raised, here's how we do it. But over here they do it this way. And we want to attribute to them why they do what they do without finding out from them. Because maybe the way they behave isn't something to do with their race and ethnicity. It could be just their particular family. Or it could just be that this particular individual behaves that way. And so it's important that when we're dealing with people from other cultures, whether we're talking about gender or religion or race, whatever, to not have premature attributions, but to get to know those individuals, to find out why they behave the way they behave. And it may confirm some of our preconceived notions and even stereotypes, or it may disavow, and it may blow our minds. But the most important thing is that we don't just prematurely attribute, but we use attribution theory to come up with the most logical attribution, but even recognizing then the most safest thing to do is to not make those attributions, but instead to allow that individual to explain why they behave the way they behave. Next, you have the one that I touched on in the announcement, and that was the cultural approach to organizations. This particular theory suggests that organizations, they don't have a culture, they don't develop, that they are the culture. And this is an interesting one. An example I use with Bethel University. So based upon this theory, it would lead us to have several questions. So say if it is true that the institution itself does not have a culture, but is a culture, then the question would be, well, who establishes the culture? So do the board members and the cabinet and the administration, do they say, well, here's the type of culture we want here at Bethel? And then you have the bulk of the body at Bethel, which would be students. Do they come in and then do they adapt or adopt the culture? Or is it more realistic to think that students come and they themselves begin to create the culture here at Bethel? Say, for example, Bethel's a Christian college. So you assume that when people come, after time, hopefully they would adopt that culture. But what happens if you flood the institution with non-Christians? Or if you flood the institutions with individuals who would rather not adhere to the lifestyle covenant? Then what becomes true? Is it that Bethel has this Christian culture? Or is it true that Bethel has the culture that is represented by the majority of people at Bethel, whatever that culture is? So which one happens? Does the institution establish the culture? Or does the institution, including everyone who's a part of it, is that the culture? And depending upon where you fall on that, it can bring about some interesting dynamics, some interesting conversations. And I have my thoughts that maybe I'll share at a later date. So that's the cultural approach to organizations. I think what's most important about this particular one is it is important that we make the distinction of, is there this already established culture? And then the members of that institution, that organization, that church, that family, they either adapt to the culture, adapt to the culture, they reject the culture, or what have you. Or is it truer that the individuals, the members of that institution, that they are the culture? And depending upon how you follow it, like I said, it would determine how you would approach things. All right. The next one is the communication accommodation theory, also known as CAT. Communication accommodation theory. This simply says that as humans, we have a tendency to adapt our communication when we interact with others. And oftentimes we do it because of the fact that there may be some social, cultural differences between us and the people we're interacting with. And in an attempt to minimize those differences, or to at least not allow those differences to hinder the communication process, we have a tendency to adapt our behavior, our communication to those individuals. So here's a very simple example of that. Think about any time you've been around a certain group of people and you find yourself wanting to fit in with that group, so you adjust some of your behavior, some of your communication. And whether it's, say, if you're normally a clean-cut person because of your walk with Christ, but then you get around certain groups and you want to fit in, and now you find yourself speaking a certain way or engaging in certain activities that you normally wouldn't, maybe due to peer pressure, but not even the peer pressure, just the accommodating you want to fit in. You don't want the differences between you and them to be so vast, so contrasting, that you kind of blend in. Or it could be something as simple as a professor, I'm just mindful of the way I speak to you all as students has a lot of similarities to the way I would speak to my colleagues, but there's still some distinctions. There are certain conversations that my colleagues and I may have about certain subjects, whether it's dealing with the institution specifically or about family, marriage, whatever it may be, certain struggles, that it wouldn't be appropriate to have those same conversations with you. Conversely, I think about some of my mentees and some other students who may be in the cafeteria and they're having a conversation about whatever they're having a conversation about, and it may include some coarse language and whatever it may be, or it may be the subject matter may be anti-Bethel or anti-professor, or could be whatever it may be. And then when I come around, there most often is, and I think there should be a tendency on a lot of their behalves to correct that or adjust that communication. they table that conversation until I leave. Or if they continue a certain conversation, if the subject matter is still appropriate, they may just change some of the vocabulary they're using, or they may hopefully try to curse less. I've had to talk to some of my mentees about that. Hey, you can't be around me cussing all the time. And it's because they failed to adapt their communication. And so this happens for many reasons whenever we're dealing with people from other cultures. Hopefully, as men and women, there's certain subject matters that we don't necessarily have to adopt or adapt when we're talking to someone from the opposite sex. But there may be some times when it's appropriate that we adjust our communication when we're dealing with the opposite sex. I know, once again, as a professor, the way I would speak to some of my mentees who are men about certain things, young men about certain things, I would adapt that vocabulary and that subject matter around young women, if I deem that that's most appropriate to do so. Now, we're talking about classes, stuff like that, but we're talking about maybe intimate stuff. If I'm challenging these young men on certain things, I may not feel, it may not be appropriate, or I may not just feel comfortable having those same conversations with young women. And so it just simply says that when we're dealing with people from other cultures, we have a tendency to adjust our behavior, and we do so for lots of reasons, and sometimes it's negative, as in we're adjusting in a way that probably compromises. But most often, hopefully, it's positive when we're adjusting in a way where we're being wise and we're wanting to prefer the other to ourselves, and we're not wanting to be offensive or say anything that's not appropriate. All right? So the fourth theory we're going to look at is Expectancy Violations Theory. EVT, Expectancy Violations Theory. This simply says that all communication can be sometimes reduced down to saying that there's this exchange of behaviors between one person and another person. And there's these expectations that should exist in terms with how I'll behave with you and how you'll behave with me. So once again, using this relationship as professor and students, whether it's written or unwritten, hopefully we've developed a type of relationship where there's certain expectations that you have on behalf of how I should behave, and vice versa. Now, once those expectations have developed, our normal interaction should meet those expectations. You expect me to say some things, I expect you to say some things. You expect me to act a certain way, I expect you to act a certain way. When we meet those expectations, normally things go well. There's no confusion, there's no disruption, there's no animosity, it's not uncomfortable because the expectations were met. However, when someone violates those expectations, and it can be good or bad, it changes some aspects of that relationship. It changes how we view each other. And so a positive example of that, because some of these expectation violations can be positive, if I had a student who over time demonstrated that they lacked motivation, always turned their assignments in late, would miss class, and even when they turned in their assignments, they were kind of half done. Whether it's right or wrong, subconsciously, I would develop an expectation for the next assignment that that's what I should expect. And all of a sudden, they turn their paper in a couple days early, and when I go to read it, it's like some of the best stuff ever. That is a positive example of expectations violate. They violated my expectations, but in a good way. So anytime someone says they were pleasantly surprised, what they're saying was, I had some expectations based upon history, based upon our experience, but this one actually surprised me, and it surprised me in a good way. And normally what that does, it enhances the relationship. It adds to. So whenever someone violates the expectations in a good way, it normally makes that interaction better. Someone shows up on time. Someone gives you an unexpected gift. Someone who normally only thinks about themselves makes a sacrifice for others. All those are positive examples of expectations, violations. A negative example would be if you come to know someone as being trustworthy. You can speak to this person in confidence. They do an excellent job. They have an excellent track record of keeping the confidence, of not spilling the beans, not spreading rumors or gossiping. And all of a sudden, there's one time you tell them something and you don't even tell them, hey, by the way, don't tell anyone. Because based upon your history, based upon their track record, you just assume that it's a done deal that they're not telling anyone. They haven't done that before. So there's an expectation that they're going to keep this a secret. And all of a sudden now they tell a whole bunch of people and they violate that expectation and it causes trouble. It causes distrust. So that's a negative example. So when we have preconceived notions, good or bad, or stereotypes, good or bad, about people from other cultures, when we interact with those individuals, if they do something positive that we can come to expect, everything is good. If they do something negative that we had come to expect, although it was negative, it's still all good in terms of they met our expectations. I expected this person to be a certain way, and they were, even if that way was negative. But all of a sudden, if you expect them to be positive and they do something negative, or if you expect them to be negative and they do something positive, all of a sudden now they violate those expectations. And now we have some decisions to make. Do we chalk up their violation as a one-time violation and say, well, this negative person is still negative. I don't care if they did this positive thing. It's not going to undo all this negative. Or do we continue, are we open to giving them the benefit of the doubt? Well, a lot of it comes down to their continued violation of those expectations. If someone who was a slacker for a long time turns their life around, all of a sudden their next 3 or 4 assignments, they turn it in on time, they do well, I begin to develop a new expectation. But that's over time. When they do well that first time, I just see it as an expectation violation. I'm like, wow, this is a pleasant surprise. I'm not going to get used to it until I'm forced to get used to it. And that goes both ways, good or bad. And we're not saying, well, this is right or wrong. We're just talking about what happens in real life. People have expectations based upon our history with them, or based upon our pre-existing preconceived notions and stereotypes. And when they violate those expectations, if they do it in a positive way, it normally makes things better. If they do it in a negative way, it makes things worse. It's plain and simple. All right? 2 more theories. Cultural identity theory simply says that individuals use communication to create and maintain their cultural group identities and relationships. So relationships are important for us to maintain our identity, because who are we apart from other people? I could say I am this, I could say I am that, but the only way to really confirm whether I'm those things is in my relationship with other people. Even in terms of my relationship with Christ, I could say I am a disciplined follower of Christ. I love Jesus. I follow Christ. I love God. God is my all. Well, the Bible talks about one of the ways we're going to know that that's true is how we love our neighbor, how we interact with other people. Because God says, how can you love the one who's invisible and hate the one who you can see? And so my identity, even my identity in Christ, is tied into my identity as a Christ follower in the context of other relationships. And so this theory simply says we develop and maintain our cultural identities within the context of relationships. And so once again, as a husband, I'm not a husband in and of myself. I'm a husband in the context of my relationship with my wife. Apart from my relationship with my wife, I'm not a husband. I'm not a professor if I don't have any students. And if I want to say if I'm a good professor or a bad professor, well, that's to be determined based upon my interaction and my relationship with the students. And so it simply says that when it comes to our cultural identities, it's important that we work those out in terms of how we relate to other people. And recognize that they're doing the same thing. So we should give everyone the benefit of the doubt and try to strive to be in great relationship with other people. So men and women, think about most struggles that men have and most struggles that women have are often in the context of the relationship with the opposite sex. So it's important that when me as a guy, when I'm relating to women, when I'm interacting with women, I try not to add to the drama that exists between men and women. I try to reconcile. Same thing when I think about being black in America, especially in the context of my interaction with white males. It's a historically contentious relationship. And so I'm mindful of that whenever I interact with white males, especially for the first time. I'm trying not to buy into any of the stereotypes that they may have for black people, especially black men. I try to carry myself in a way that allows them to break some of those stereotypes. And it's amazing how many people, one guy, white guy, told me I was the first warm, as in non-hostile and caring, first warm black guy he ever interacted with. And he said this to me in tears one time. Well, I wasn't trying to be that guy. I was just trying to do what I do. But then I realized that I didn't know his history. And so you never know what someone else is going through and what they've experienced with someone of your culture, whether you're talking about men, women, religious, Christians, or whatever it may be. So it's best that we try to represent those cultural identities to the best of our ability, because it's within the context of those relationships that we're either building up their view of those cultures or we're tearing down their view of those cultures. We're adding to their negative view. And so keep that in mind, and vice versa. And then lastly is a theory called the spiral of silence. And this states that a social group or society may isolate or exclude members whenever those members have ideologies, beliefs, values, etc., that conflict with the greater society. So if you have a dissenting voice, everyone's saying one thing, and you stand up as the minority and you say something that's unpopular, this particular theory says that when you say something that's unpopular, society's tendency to isolate you and marginalize you will often cause you to next time keep that unpopular view to yourself. And you get into a spiral of silence. And so I was just thinking just today in terms of someone was talking about how they believe the COVID-19 deaths are being inflated because people are being falsely reported as dying of COVID when maybe they died of something else. And there may be some of that going on. But I think when it's all said and done, the numbers are actually going to be deflated because there are going to be a whole bunch of people who die of COVID who never got diagnosed because of lack of testing. And as I was thinking about that, I started thinking about other historical circumstances where the reporting is normally often deflated or decreased because of a lack of reporting. And one thing came to my mind is the issue of rape. And you may have someone who's saying, you know what, when someone says they've been raped, how do we know that that person's telling the truth? Because there have been times when people have been raped, when women have been raped and they lied about it. That's true. But for every woman who probably lied about being raped, there's probably 100 women who were raped who didn't report it for fear of reprisal, for fear of reputation being sullied, or for fear of being criminalized. And so normally there's an underreporting, and it's due to that spiral of silence. If we're in a male-dominated society where women have been viewed as class citizens, not just in America, second-class citizens, not just in America, but around the world, and you have certain cultures that are even more masculine cultures where women are really domineered and seen as inferior and subjugated to all types of horrors, who could blame a woman if she kept silent for fear of not getting further attacked. And so whenever we have minorities in any capacity, whether it's rape victims, whether it's someone who speaks out against racism, whether it's someone who speaks out against sexism in the workplace, whether it's someone who is a religious minority and is in a secular institution or secular situation, the tendency is that person will start off standing strong, speaking out on their beliefs, but if they get shot down over and over and get marginalized and even criminalized and ostracized for their beliefs, there's a tendency for that minority to then go into a spiral of silence when they refuse to speak out, not because there's no problem, but because they don't want to have a bigger problem come their way when they get accused of always complaining or not being a team player or trying to disrupt the way of life. And so that's something to keep in mind. So these are just 6 intercultural theories that I've introduced. And as mentioned in the announcements, I want you to take 2 of these theories, learn the definitions, and maybe even Google some more definitions of those particular theories to get some greater insight. And then be prepared on Wednesday to talk about a certain real life circumstance where you use these 2 theories to better explain and interpret that circumstance. Like I said, the example I gave was the cultural approach to organizations and looked at Bethel's institution. Does Bethel itself, wherever Bethel is, do they establish the culture? Or is the culture established by the people who make up Bethel? Even if it's the students who are the largest population of Bethel, do they make up the culture? What role do they have in influencing the culture and things of that nature? So be prepared for that on Wednesday. Once again, this has been Professor Theo. Take care and God bless.